Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. This is your midweek roundup of all things lovely and embedded and maker. Now, eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that we did not have a show last week and I am not in my regular attic of dreams. And that is because the computer I used to make this show sadly has died. I think it's a problem with my GPU. I did a lot of working out to try and fix it all, and in the end it was high time I upgraded my main machine anyway, and I am currently awaiting all of the parts to arrive to build it. So this show and possibly the next few will be a little bit different. I will still be talking to you at the start and at the end, and of course there will be a mystery box competition, but the rest of it will be done on my splendid Linux laptop, and hopefully you won't notice all that much of a difference. But anyway, that's enough waffling from me. We still have a lot to get through this week, so let's get on with the show. Hey folks, this is Future Ian here. Unfortunately, I did not notice that I had a camera set up in OBS for this episode, and that camera was not on, so there is an annoying black box in the bottom left corner of the screen, which there's not much I can do at this late stage. So apologies for that, I hope it is not too distracting. Anyway, let's get on with the show. We're going to begin this week with a few projects, and we're going to start on the Electromaker website. And the eagle eye among you may have noticed that this is also the first week the Electromaker Show has been captured on a Linux laptop. Because I do, as I have said on the show many times, I do prefer to run Linux where I can, but for the big editing machine, I do like to run Windows, because that's also where all the games tend to live. Anyway, here we are on the Electromaker website, and we have a project from Chariscat, who we have featured on the show before. So the last time that we featured Chariscat is when she was building an Arduino synthesizer. Now, those of you who watch the show know me and know that this is exactly the thing I am into the most. Using microcontrollers and making digital synthesizers is one of my favorite things in the world. I'm also a big fan of analog synthesis, but yes, microcontrollers meeting music. You know me, you know that's what I love. And Chariscat is back with a project on multiplying multiplexers in Arduino. And this is essentially a fantastic primer in using multiplexers. Now, if you want to know the full details as to how this works, I would advise you simply to come to the page here, read through everything that Chariscat has written, and also go to her absolutely in-depth two-part video series on the subject. I love these kind of videos because the information in these videos is 100% correct. But this is someone who is learning to do something and then teaching you what they're learning. I really like this style of teaching. And there's a few things in this that are very interesting to me, not only because this is going to be used in a music project, this is going to be an machine learning driven synthesizer of some kind, which I find very compelling indeed. But there's a few nice little touches in this video for those of us who are also a little bit obsessed with this idea of taking Arduino down to its rawest bare metal. So this is a little still from the video. As I say, I don't really want to play the video. I'd rather you just go to Chariscat's channel and give her the views. But there's a couple of things going on here. You can see the truth tables for the multiplexer chips here. And understanding how these truth tables work is essentially how you understand how to use the multiplexer. Now, the code that you can use in Arduino, you can entirely use Arduino language if you want to. But those of you who are familiar with the AT Mega series of chips will recognize these two things here, DDRB and port B. That is the data direction register for the B side pins on the chip, and port B, which is the whether you are setting them to be high or low. And so, as you can see here, this is setting ports 8, 9, and 10 as outputs in one go, and setting ports 8, 9, and 10 as low, all in one go. And yeah, as I've said, I was a big fan of Mitchell Davis's bare metal Arduino series that he put out recently. We'll be talking about him again in a moment. But this combines a lot of things that I find somewhat exciting. But bare metal programming aside, this is an image that I also find somewhat exciting anyway, because the idea of lots and lots of knobs going into a microcontroller to control lots and lots of things is something that we all find very interesting, or we wouldn't be watching or making a show like this. This two-part video series is fantastic. I would suggest, even if you're not necessarily 100% into Macs, watching that video, because Arduino and hardware introductions to programs like Max MSP are a good way of sort of getting to know them. They are by nature so hugely open-ended, being visual programming language programs or platforms, or whatever you want to call it, that it can be a little bit of too big of a project to just dive in and try and learn Max. But if you have a project in mind, or you're coming at it from a certain angle, it's a good way to learn it. And that appears to be what Chariscat is doing. And both of these videos are very informative. And I just can't wait to see what she comes up with. Yeah, this is a very cool channel. And as I mentioned last time, There's these videos about the synth, and these two instructional videos are the more recent ones. However, that she also has a bunch of different covers, what with this being a channel with microcontrollers and music. So yes, head to the Charascat channel and give her a subscription, and I'm very glad to have seen this project and to feature it on the show once again. So I just briefly mentioned Mitchell Davis, and I've talked about him several times on the show before. His Arduino to bare metal series, or AVR bare metal series, whatever it's called, is probably the best way to go from Arduino knowledge to some basic bare metal knowledge. And I had been doing a lot of fighting in the background trying to learn that stuff myself before seeing that video, and it definitely helped me fill in some of the gaps, especially if you're someone who really is into the pain of working just on the command line and with programs like Vim. It is a fantastic thing. He is back with a new series on the STM32, and this is number 1. Which STM32 board should you buy? And I don't want to spoil the video, so I'm just going to say once again, go and watch it. Although I will say that I am kind of glad that me not knowing what I was doing and sort of hopefully reaching out and grabbing stuff resulted in me getting an STM Nucleo, STM32 Nucleo, and an STM32 Blue Pill, in fact a whole bag of them. And it seems handy that I have both of these boards and I will be able to follow along with the tutorial. If you haven't seen any of Mitchell Davis's videos before, he is fantastic at explaining things in a way that I think anyone with some basic programming knowledge can understand. As I previously mentioned, his bare metal Arduino series is fantastic, and this is only the first episode of the STM32 series, but I will be following along for sure. And one of the things that I can say is that if you were, the blue pill that's just come up on the screen right now, if you were thinking of getting an STM32 chip and were worried about cost, you can get those little blue pill chips for about $1.50 to $2. They are incredibly cheap. So yes, I just wanted to let you guys know that this new series has started. If you're not already subscribed to Mitchell Davis, he is quickly becoming one of my favorite new tutorial people in the bare metal microcontroller kind of world. And I will leave a link to this video in the description of the video that you're watching right now. Up next, the Nintendo Game & Watch. Now, you may be wondering, well, why is this even featuring on the show? Surely this is just a retro throwback device from Nintendo, and what with it being Nintendo, they can maybe charge a little bit more than they should for it. Well, what makes this thing interesting is that once you get under the hood, it is essentially just a little development board with a screen. It is in fact an STM32. You may be seeing a little bit of a theme here. So I think a lot of people, as soon as the Game & Watch came out, wondered, well, how could you hack it? Because STM32 chips are definitely powerful enough to do some basic emulation. So surely there is a way to turn this into more than just a little gimmick. Because in case you aren't familiar, this is I can't remember the exact price, but I think a $60 to $80 thing that will just play 1 or 2 versions of earlier games. And other than that, it is just a watch. It is a thing that you want to have, but it doesn't have that much in the way of function. So, having heard about the Nintendo Game & Watch, you, like me, probably wondered how long it would be before it was hacked, and the answer is it was hacked before it was even released. Stack Smashing got one of the advanced versions of it and set to work decoding how it works. As I mentioned, it has an STM32 chip in there, and I don't even really know where to start with this. This is one of the most detailed breakdowns of how you can take something that is not designed to be hacked and then make it hackable not only by yourself but then by other people. In short, this takes you everything from what information he could gather from the microcontroller and associated SPI chip, some of the problems he faced along the way, in that STM32 chips have 3 levels of read protection. One is none whatsoever, you can just read, write, do whatever you want with the chip. At the other end is like a completely development release version where you can't interact with the chip in any way. And in the middle is, I believe you can write to the chip, but you cannot read it, or something along those lines. Maybe you can just read the RAM. I can't remember off the top of my head. And this takes you through the entire process of, just taking this thing apart digitally and working out how to put your own bootloader and your own ROMs and everything else on it. And yes, before anyone asks, Doom. Doom runs on the Nintendo Game & Watch. But even this video in and of itself is not quite the meme level of stuff that you find on Twitter, because it goes through the incredible difficulties it took to actually try and get Doom to run on this firmware, firmware's on the screen, on this hardware. Conrad Beckman is the name that I was trying to grab before. Stack Smashing and Conrad Beckman are behind this. And getting Doom running on this thing was no easy feat whatsoever. And the great thing about this project is it's not just a show-off. Everything that has been done here has been well documented, and in fact they have now put together a still very early days, but easier way for you to interact with the Nintendo Game & Watch, back up the data that comes already with it so you don't lose that forever, and start hacking it yourself. I would be surprised if the work of these two guys alone doesn't start a nice little homebrewed games just for the Nintendo Game & Watch, or at least that ecosystem. I have to admit, if I could find, say, a second-hand Nintendo Game & Watch that was worth the price, I would be very, very tempted to get in on this because it seems like so much fun. So I'm just leaving this up on the screen for a second so you can see what I'm talking about. It is an STM32 chip, as I said. It has an SPI flash chip on the side. You can see the debug connectors down here on the bottom. And as I mentioned, one of the problems that he faced was how to get around the protection on the chip. I would just suggest maybe going to the Stack Smashing channel and watching the 3 videos I think he now has out on the Nintendo Game & Watch. They are all equally fascinating. And as I mentioned, these are well documented and available on GitHub. There is a new GitHub repository pretty much for each video. The main ones that I think people would probably be interested in is the Game & Watch main backup one, and this teaches you how to backup and restore your Game & Watch if you want to hack it yourself. And then they also have a sort of base project, which is just the bare bones of getting it working with the STM32 chip and all of the hardware that is on board. I haven't spent as much time looking at this, but ironically, this is probably the one that I find the most interesting, because if I did have one, like I do with almost every microcontroller I have, Hello World from scratch is something that I am quite a fan of doing, to try and get my head around something that, even if I end up using high-level tools in the end and I never come back to it, just to sort of go once through the gutters and really work out how something works, you know, just makes me feel like I know what I'm doing a little bit more. That might not be true. Oh yes, and the source code for Doom on the Nintendo Game & Watch is here as well. Although if you watch the Nintendo Game & Watch video, you may find that there are other things that you would prefer to emulate Doom on, at least for now, but I will leave that up to Stack Smashing to explain for himself. So as I said, there are actually 3 videos in this series that I suggest watching, but I will link this Bringing Homebrew to the Nintendo Game & Watch video in the description of the video, just because I feel like it gives a good overview of the entire project. If any of you own a Nintendo Game & Watch and intend to do something like this, please do let me know in the comments. That is something that I would love to see documented, you could stick it up on the Electromaker website or just document it somewhere and let me know and I can put it on the show, because it's all well and good getting a development board that is designed for hacking, but taking a well-known chip that is inside something, especially as closed as most Nintendo stuff is, and doing your own bidding with it is really appeals to the hacker side of my hardware fascinations, as it were. So I will leave a link to this video in the description. Up next, we have a project on GitHub called Speaker Snitch. Now, I have to hold my hands up and be honest, I can't remember if I saw this on the Raspberry Pi subreddit or whether this is a link that someone sent into me. If you did send this link into me, I'm very sorry I forgot. As you're seeing by the difference of the show this week, this hasn't been a normal show week for me. However, Speaker Snitch is a project which kind of fits my other side of my life quite well, given that when I'm not doing this show, one of my jobs is as a DIY and smart home news writer. So this actually crosses over both of the things I write news about quite well. Anyhow, this short video on Nick Build's YouTube channel explains exactly what is going on. As you can see, there is a light flashing there, and that flashes every single time a smart speaker is sending data up to the cloud. The idea is that you want to know exactly when a smart speaker might be sharing your data, and as he says in the GitHub repository that goes with this, there are many cases of smart speakers sending more data to the cloud than they should. Now, as I previously mentioned, I write about both of these things professionally. I am absolutely aware there is a far wider argument to do with ethics and privacy, and also to do with common sense when it comes to massively connected smart speakers from companies so large that they can afford to do what they want, essentially. I am not immune to that. But again, as I say, as someone who is a writer about it, I'm kind of interested in all of this stuff. And this seems like a great DIY project to get a bit of an idea as to exactly how much your smart speaker might be talking to the crowd. Smart speaker is a difficult word to say sometimes. Another thing about this project that I like is that it uses the big 3, actually. It uses a Raspberry Pi, it uses an Arduino, albeit one of the Arduino IoT boards, which I believe has an ESP8266, or is it an ESP32 on board? I'm not actually all that familiar with the official newer connected Arduino boards. Maybe we need to spend a bit of time on that. And it uses also network sniffing as well. So the idea being that the Raspberry Pi is sitting on the network, sniffing any kind of packets that are being sent from the smart speaker up to the cloud, and that will be passed via a script and sent to an endpoint on the Arduino, which flashes an LED whenever it happens. And as always, Nick Build, who created this project, has described it in text far better than I have in speech, and this diagram kind of gives you an idea of how it works as well. And so, yeah, this is a really nice project for people that have a smart speaker and have maybe wondered about the privacy implications of it. I live in this very kind of strange 1 foot in, 1 foot out, because I do have an Alexa, which I don't use particularly often. We don't really need a smart speaker in our lives, but it is something that I have to keep knowledgeable about, so it is set up upstairs in the attic. I've always kind of wondered about hacking it, but by the same token, I don't want to have to buy another Echo speaker if I break it, because I use it for my other job. So this is a very interesting thing to me. I would love it if anyone out there has tried hacking their smart speaker before and would like to tell me about it. And, you know, maybe since this is completely non-destructive, I might give this one a go myself and see just how much Alexa is telling the crowd how much I swear at my editing software. And there's going to be a lot more swearing this week if I'm editing on a laptop. So as well as the code itself, there's instructions as to how you can launch this project. It seems very simple to set up without all that much hardware. So yeah, I suggest you give it a go. I will leave a link to this GitHub in the description. And if you want to watch this little video again, the 25-second demo of it, there is also a link to that from the GitHub page. Over to the Arduino project subreddit and a post titled "Mind-Blowing Hand-Controlled Laser Turret" by Cyberman471. Now, I'm not going to play the full video as always, but this is a project that uses an Xbox Kinect to track body movements and then a laser pointer attached to a servo tower. And the project itself is very, very cool. There is no documentation for it or anything like that. However, there's one thing I love about this project more than anything. It is the fact that enthusiasm plays a massive part in this project. And you know how much I love enthusiasm. So,
there we go. Okay, come on. Come on. Okay. All right, that's me. Hi. Oh my God. Oh. Yes. Dude, this is so fucking awesome. Look at that shit. Whoa, dude, that looks so sick.
So yes, apologies for the F-bomb, that wasn't me, that was him, but yeah, come on, who couldn't love this level of enthusiasm? And who doesn't love that feeling that when you've been working on something for hours, it finally comes together? Yeah, as mentioned before, this uses an Xbox Kinect, which is on the other side of the room. And by the way, if you are looking for some kind of 3D depth perception camera to use in projects, you still can't go wrong with the Kinect. They're incredibly cheap if you get them from eBay or get them secondhand. There's a lot of folks that got rid of their Xbox to maybe get the next generation of Xbox, completely forgot about the Kinect, and are chucking them up for just nothing. More often than not, you can find them just being given away practically at car boot sales. They're just not really loved by people, but for makers, they're absolutely amazing. And there's a very open set of SDKs for them that you can get as well. And of course, the rest of it, yeah, Arduino and laser turrets. But what I love about that, there's two things. One is how well it worked, because when you saw him moving his hand around, it was incredibly smooth. And the other is just that sheer level of enthusiasm for something working. It just makes me so happy. And as I've said a few times over the last few weeks in the show, I think it is very important not only for projects to be cool and clever, but for them to please you as well. And this absolutely pleases me. And by the sounds of things, very much pleased Cyberman471. So I will leave a link to this in the description of the video, and I hope it gives you a smile this week. We may be having a pared down Electromaker show this week, but that does not mean we will not be having funding website things. And we find ourselves back on crowd supply. This is the Ant2 USB-C LiPo Charger, and this is apparently the tiniest USB-C LiPo charger, and I am inclined to believe them. Because look at it! Look how tiny that little thing is, that's incredible. So that is a USB-C connector, and I am a massive fan of USB-C connectors and power delivery in general. Leaving power delivery itself aside for a moment, just one of the things about USB-C that I like so much is that it is a reversible cable, so you can plug it in very easily when you're reaching around something in the dark. Half the things I own are micro USB and the other half are mini USB, and it's something that has driven me mad for a very long time. So I'm very, very glad that USB Type-C appears to be taking over. So as you can see here from these other two images, it really does have an absolutely tiny footprint, and as the blurb here mentions, it is just 16 by 9 millimeters. And it uses the microchip MCP73831, and if you've ever tried to build your own battery chargers and things like that, you will be familiar with that named chip. It definitely does what it says on the tin. I think this is kind of cool. They say despite how tiny it is, you can use regular M3 or M2.5 screws to mount it to something, which is kind of amazing, because again, another thing that can be a problem when you start getting really, really super small is that unless you are an absolute genius with your soldering iron, you start to get into the kind of like SMD territory, and when that happens, you have to start asking yourself why you're bothering with a breakout board at all, and there's a million and one things. This is a perfect example of, yes, you can go very, very small and still be very, very accessible. Yeah, I'm kind of compelled as to exactly how well this thing will work. I mean, given the onboard chip, it should be absolutely fine. In fact, I literally don't know why I said that. I think it's just because it is so unbelievably tiny. You could just plop this essentially on the side of a casing, couldn't you? And that would just take care of all of your battery charging. Yeah, this is a compelling one. Anyhow, features and specs for those that like them. The charging current is between a half amp and 100 milliamps, and the charging voltage is 4.2 volts, and it has status indication LEDs, and as I said, yeah, very, very tiny, 16 by 9 by 6 millimeters, and it uses a high quality USB-C connector from Japan Electronics Aviation, indeed. As with many things these days, it is also completely open sourced hardware, so you can look at the schematic here, and if you wanted to try and build one yourself, you absolutely could, but as I say so often, if someone's made something that you like, why not support the person that made it? And you'll be able to do that when this launches on Crowd Supply, which so far it has not. But as always, you can either enter your name into the box here, or just wait, because you're almost certainly going to hear from this one from me again. Moving on to Ollie, which is a Crowd Supply campaign for an all-in-one USB to isolated UART CAN USB RS485 and RS232 converter. Now that's a lot of letters and numbers, but essentially this is a plug-in your laptop to anything device. I have featured a USB to CAN adapter on the show way back. It may have even been before it was a video show. It might have been when this was a written show. Which allows you to hack your car, and this is essentially a tiny Swiss Army knife that you can keep with you. Plug one end into your laptop and plug the other end into absolutely anything and safely hack it without blowing up the USB ports or in the entirety of your computer. And as someone who is currently recording this show on a laptop, I understand the pain of bits of your computer going bang, especially when you aren't sure quite which bits have. Anyway, Ollie is definitely one of those things where on the surface there's actually not very much to say about it, because it is just, as I said, a USB to pretty much anything you want. The initial sentence that I said at the start should tell you everything you need to know about it. There's 2 UARTs, a CAN USB, I've already said that all out loud. If that is something that immediately grabs your ideas and makes you think of a million and one things you could do with it, then you're already excited about this. This is just clearly been designed by someone who has dealt with these problems. There is no chaff here, there's nothing useless here, and there's also nothing that's particularly gimmicky here. This is a tool. The comparison to a Swiss Army knife is genuine, but by the same token, you could even say that some Swiss Army knives have some extra bits that you're never going to use, whereas this seems to be absolutely drilling down to the most useful things that you could have attached to your laptop, and various ways that you can use them. So the features and specs are of course on the Crowd Supply page, and there are a few too many for me to just go through them all now on the show, but if you are interested in this, I suggest you come and have a look. There is some very interesting stuff in here, and perhaps slightly easier, more parsable to read is this comparison chart, which talks about what Ollie does compared to similar things that do these kind of adapters, these kind of adapting between USB on your computer and any kind of microcontroller or thing in the wild. So yes, in short, Ollie seems to be the do-it-all tool for talking to things with your laptop. It is one of those things that I look at and I think is absolutely gorgeous, and I wish I had a use case for it. I wish I was working out in the wild with things to justify me spending the $56 to get one. If you are someone who does work out in the wild and does need an easy way to interface with things without carrying a million wires around with you, I think the $56 that's being asked for this is an absolute steal. This does not look like something that has been cheaply produced in order to be mass sold. This looks like a tool made by someone who uses tools for people who need tools, and that is worth both supporting and paying a decent premium for. That said, $56 for this is no premium price whatsoever. I think this is fantastic, and I will leave a link to this in the description, and you can read through this project yourself. And of course, there is a little bit more written by Ali Sim further down here as to why this thing was built and how it was, along with the production plan for it. So yeah, I'll leave a link to this one in the description. We find ourselves back on Indiegogo with Tactigon Skin, a stylish 3D wearable mouse. Now, there is a video that goes alongside this, which I'll play in just a moment, but essentially, you probably already kind of have the idea of what this is. It's essentially a little battery-powered gesture sensor with a few extra nice things built in, which attaches to your computer, and you can use it in place of a mouse. You can use it for presentations, as it says here. And this is the kind of thing that I completely understand people getting excited about. What could be cooler than just having this gesture-based thing that isn't a camera that's sending your data to the cloud, that isn't using a voice assistant AI or anything like that. No, just a simple thing that you move your hand around and it does what you want. And watching the video, it certainly seems like it might do that kind of thing. The other side to it, by the way, is that it has a microphone in it, so you can use voice commands to open certain things. The idea being that you can, with a combination of voice commands and gestures, you can do everything that you need to do. Now, they're saying $69 for this release of the Tactigon, and that seems like a very, very reasonable price for all of the things that it says it can do. And of course, in the video, it shows it's doing all of these things. So yeah, here you are. You can use it for gaming, you can use it for presentations, you can use it for all kinds of things. You can use it for 3D CAD design, you can do this, that, and the other. Now, this project kind of looks cool. I mean, I have used various different kinds of mice. As I've mentioned before, I use a normal, I've just started using a normal mouse on my main computer again after several years of using vertical mice and trackball mice to deal with problems with my wrists. So the idea of having yet another kind of mouse really appeals to me, but there is potentially a problem. Well, not a problem with this as such. This is more a problem with funding website things in general. And I've talked about this in the past. Now, crowd supply is a little bit different. And Kickstarter at least has that thing where if something doesn't get completely kickstarted, they don't get the money. Indiegogo is one of the many sites that has issues where you could give money to a project that just disappears, especially if the project is in a different part of the world where you aren't going to be able to have any kind of law enforcement follow up on problems with your money disappearing. And you might have noticed that this does look like a very fancy video, but it doesn't really give any details as to how this is working. And one thing that I find a little bit more worrying is the fact that when you actually watch carefully, you realize that the gestures that the actors are using aren't necessarily fitting quite perfectly in with the things that are happening on the screen. Now, I'm not saying that this is fake. I'm not some Thunderfoot-esque debunker saying this is fake, you should avoid it. I'm actually following this with quite a lot of interest because I would love to have a more gesture-based mouse. But me being the person that usually runs in and tries to buy cool things that I like as early as I possibly can, I will be giving this one a miss for a while until I see them out in the wild and see how well they do. But that said, I wanted to put this on the show for two reasons. One, that yes, this is a very cool idea. But two, it's a perfect example of the kind of Kickstarter-esque thing or funding website thing that I might give a little bit of time before actually trying out. But Ian, I hear you ask, if the show is not in the attic of dreams, what happened to the mystery box? But the mystery box has come with me down into the flat, albeit the smaller mystery box. So rather than bring the entire mystery box, in a rather convoluted manner, I took a smaller box, put it inside the mystery box, and put a prize in it and brought it down here. I have no way of proving to you that I don't know what is in this box, but you're just going to have to believe me. I've been trying to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. So, mystery box competition, everyone who left a comment on last week's video could be entered into it, and this week's mystery box prize is another thing from Linkit. I did think this was a small box, and I was worried that we might be trying to give away another power adapter or something useless like that. But if I remember correctly, the last Linkit thing was quite a powerful little beastie. So let's have a look. This is a Linkit Smart 7688, but what are you? Okay, so I'll try and get in a little bit closer, although I am aware that the lighting in here isn't quite as good as upstairs. But this is a tiny little development board with a MediaTek chip in it. I forget the exact name of the chip. However, it's a pretty powerful one. It goes at about 580 megahertz, has 32 megabytes of flash and about 128 megabytes of RAM. It's pretty chunky for a small development board. And of course, you may have noticed on the back, it has a micro SD slot. According to Seed, who make this, you can program on it using Python and C, along with something else that I forget. But the interesting thing about it is it seems to have as the core of its operating system OpenWRT, which is something that I am mostly familiar with because it's what you use to flash your Wi-Fi router with if you wanted to have open source firmware. There is a wealth of documentation for this out on the Seed website, but anyhow, that's not for me to read because I'm not going to be keeping this. It has to go to the winner of this week's prize, and let's find out who that is. And the winner of the mystery box competition and this little Linkit Smart 7688 is North Shore PX. So we'll be in touch with you as to how we can get this thing out to you in the post, but for now we have a lot more show to get on with, so let's get on with it. Moving on to a few short bits of news from the week and just things that don't fit anywhere else in the show, really. Starting with the Rome Maker Faire. Now, they are having a digital version of the Rome Maker Faire, and it is happening this week. In fact, the day this video comes out is Wednesday, and I believe the pre-show for the Maker Faire starts on Thursday, and they have a weekend streaming event for the Rome Maker Show. Rome Maker Faire. I'm getting confused with the Electromaker Show. Anyway, the Maker Faire in Berlin, where I live, is one of my favorite events of the year. I've been going for quite some time, and there's always a massive variation of different kinds of events and things to see. And there's no reason to think that this won't be any different, except albeit online. So if you are interested in going, which of course I will be too, you can enter your email here and you'll get notified of all the things that are happening. And there is some information for the exhibitors and a few different things that are happening in general as well. Now, one thing I'm not 100% sure of is language. I don't know if this is going to be in Italian or whether this is going to be in English. I don't particularly mind with my pigeon level of Italian that I know watching an Italian broadcast. That'd be quite fun for me, actually. But if there is any kind of English version of it, or anyone that is covering this in the English language, I will try to leave that in the show notes as well, once I've had time to do a little bit more sleuthing and research. But yes, I'm absolutely very happy to see that the Maker Faire Rome will be going ahead, albeit in digital form, like so many different Maker Fairs have this year. And now moving on to a firm favourite of the show. It is, of course, explainingcomputers.com, the fantastic show by Christopher Barnett. I would have probably mentioned that he's put out a channel update anyway, because unlike other channels, his channel updates tend to be actually very informative and give a very good idea about what he will be looking at over the next little while. And I, as I've said many times before, defer to this man's knowledge. But this one is exciting for a number of reasons. Now, as always, I don't want to play too much of another person's video. I'd much rather you go and look at it yourself. But he is having a new studio built out of an old garage, and is also celebrating 5 years, almost to the day, since he started putting videos up on YouTube under the explainingcomputers.com channel name. But anyhow, as well as the updates as to what is happening with the channel, he also gives a very nice update as to what has happened in terms of technology recently that he hasn't had a chance to cover yet, that he will be doing so in future, and a little peek into the kind of videos that he will be making over the coming year. But really, in short, I'm sure anyone who watches this channel also watches Explaining Computers. Christopher Barnett has been doing this fantastically for years, and yeah, from all of us here, congratulations on 5 years of fantastic and informative videos. We look forward to the next 5. Moving on to the news that Adafruit is making a machine learning USB stick for Raspberry Pi. Now, this has been reported in various places. I chose this Tom's Hardware article because it has a very nice large picture of the breakout board, and it is using the Coral TPU. Now, you might be familiar with that name because this is exactly the same thing that comes with the Google Coral Dev Board and the Google Coral USB Accelerator. So here you can see the layout for the board, and as you can see, it looks much like your average USB drive on the surface, but instead of storage it has the TPS62827 Coral accelerator chip, which is a tensor processing unit for edge computing. This is the same one that is in the Google Coral USB accelerator. It's not the same thing that you get in things like Intel compute sticks, but it's the same kind of technology essentially. It is for giving your machine learning inference tasks and things like that to something else so that it can do it and your hardware can concentrate on running your app or whatever you want to do with it. If you want to classify cats, you can classify cats, or as I showed in the show a couple of weeks ago, if you want to use machine learning in order to classify crows and film them doing tasks, then this is the perfect thing for that as well. So, as I mentioned, this has been widely reported, but there really isn't too much to know about it quite yet. It's using the same thing as the Coral Edge USB device, the USB accelerator. I don't really know if it's going to have any advantage over it or not. I mean, they're saying this one is specifically designed for the Raspberry Pi. I don't know if that means there's going to be any particular difference there. Having it plugging straight in might be nice because, again, Raspberry Pis can have cables all over the place. I've got to be honest though, one of the things I really like about my USB accelerator from Google is that it isn't plugged straight into the computer, and that you can use a 90-degree USB if you want and keep it tucked out of the way. Although I must admit, it's been a while since I've messed around with it, and maybe with the new setup with having the Pi permanently on the desk, I would like to just be able to plug it in and plug it out. I don't know. This is all much of a muchness. There is no idea when this is coming out quite yet, and there is no price, but it is coming out. Adafruit is getting into the USB TPU game. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this episode, this is the very first Electromaker Show that is being recorded on a Linux laptop, and I will also be editing it on a Linux laptop, which is going to be an interesting experience indeed. But I am very much a fan of Linux, and through the time that I've been messing around with Linux and different distributions, there's only two really that I've stuck with for any length of time. One being Ubuntu and the other being Linux Mint, and I am back to Linux Mint now. It's very difficult to break a habit once you have a favorite distribution. There's nothing about Linux Mint that makes it any better than any others in my opinion, but I am used to it and it is mine. However, one of the distributions that many friends of mine swear by and absolutely adore, especially those who come from Mac, and with good reason, is Elementary OS. And of course, the problem with me not having a camera is the entire time I've been waffling at you, you've been reading what's on the screen and you already know what I'm about to say. Elementary OS is now available for the Raspberry Pi. And as you can see here, this is all you need to see really. This is the current desktop powered by a Raspberry Pi 4 and running Elementary OS. It is an officially supported build now, and the blog post on the Elementary blog, I suppose, tells you everything you need to know about running it. Also, it reminded me of something that I did not cover on the show. I can't remember if it's because it happened long before I did the show or whether it's just something that passed me by. But as well as running Elementary OS on the Raspberry Pi, there is also a build of the Elementary OS for the Pinebook Pro. So if anyone did actually dive in and get a Pinebook Pro, which is a really impressive looking little ARM-based laptop, and I do love everything that Pine64 do, Elementary OS will work on that. But anyway, this is distraction. Elementary OS is working on the Raspberry Pi 4 and I cannot wait to try it out. As I said, I have nothing against Elementary OS. I think it's a fantastic distribution for Linux. It's just not the one I'm used to, but it's definitely one of the most aesthetically pleasing distributions for Linux. And yeah, if you are wanting to try Linux out for the first time, especially if you're someone who's coming from a Mac background, maybe Elementary OS is something you can try, and you can try it out on your Raspberry Pi without having to completely wipe and start again on a laptop or run up a USB live stick or whatever. It's just a quite nice way of trying these things out. And who knows, maybe Elementary will become a really heavily used device, operating system on devices like the Raspberry Pi 4. It would be a lovely thing if there was a beautiful distribution. But yeah, aesthetics don't necessarily do it for me, but if you are wanting to try Elementary OS, it is official now. You can get it on the Raspberry Pi 4. I'm going to have to give this a go and see what it feels like. So to finish off this week's show, which I hope hasn't been too waffly or rambly, it's very difficult to kind of speak not into a camera. I just feel like I'm speaking to a screen and distracting myself in every moment, so apologies if I've gone off on a million tangents on this very strange episode. But yes, we are going to close out the show by talking about the latest Raspberry Pi OS release. And in many ways there isn't all that much to talk about, and in others you could dive very deep with this. To give a very high level view, as you can see, Chromium has received an upgrade. As the blog post says, there's always a bit of an issue trying to get Chromium to play nice with the hardware of the Raspberry Pi. It seems like they've got that working. Sites like YouTube will have good video. And one thing that I think is especially important this year is conferencing clients like Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, and Zoom should work smoothly in Raspberry Pi Chromium, which this year, with I should imagine more conference calls than ever happening around the holiday season, is a very good thing. Now, Pulse Audio is the thing that I could either spend 1 minute talking about, which I will try to do, or I could spend a very long time talking about. Pulse Audio is, for those of you that don't know, it is a semi-low level audio driver set for Linux. Now, Linux uses ALSA, which is the very low, which is the kind of lowest level, as far as I understand, way of working with audio on Linux without literally writing your own drivers. Now, I might be wrong about that. I tend to use the tools that are there. If I want to play audio, I will use something like Pulse Audio, or maybe even a slightly higher level library that I can just say, here's the sound I want you to output, and here's the timing, do it. That's what I use to make Linux sense. Pulse Audio is the one that I am sort of middle ground familiar with, and I'm very glad that that the Raspberry Pi OS will be using it going forward. I said I'd try and keep this to a minute. I've already gone over that, haven't I? In short, Pulse Audio is good. It is a easier system to use than ALSA. It works on top of ALSA, but it is not some horrible high-level bloaty library. It just does the things it needs to do, is well documented, and is hackable. So you can change your audio inputs and outputs. You can use your Raspberry Pi like a normal computer and never think about it, or you can dive into a fairly well documented code base and turn your Raspberry Pi into a multi-channel effects box, guitar, pedal, video, whatever machine. You can do all that with Pulse Audio. I'm very glad they're not using ALSA anymore, because ALSA's documentation is not a funny joke, but a joke nonetheless. And finally, Raspberry Pi OS now uses Cups. I will spend even less time on this. Cups is the common Unix printing system. You can use Cups to turn your Raspberry Pi into just a standalone print server. It's something that I have been meaning to get around to finishing for a long time. I have a half-finished print server upstairs. Or you can use it to print from your Raspberry Pi. There's a lot of things you can do with Cups. So yes, if you are wondering about printing from your Raspberry Pi, as they are getting closer and closer to being a general day-to-day desktop computer, this is something that you'll be interested in looking into. Cups as a general thing is one of the more simple to use printing systems once you have it set up, and you can even link apps on your phone to it, so you can just use one networked device attached to a printer and print everything in the house doing it. Although I'm sure most modern printers do that anyway. I just haven't bought a printer in several years. Now, there are some new hardware options and a little how-to down here as to how you can do all of these updates and upgrades, but the last thing I'm going to talk about is accessibility. It's something that's been on my mind quite a lot recently, because there's some changes in accessibility coming to various smart home devices. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I write about those. And the fact that Raspberry Pi has spent a bit of time trying to improve accessibility on the desktop is something that I am very fond of. I am very glad that people are taking the concept of accessibility seriously, even in hobby world. I do understand that it can be difficult to put the extra time into accessibility, but I can tell you, as someone who has both cared for and had friends with accessibility issues in the past, that it is very appreciated when you do, and the Raspberry Pi Foundation seems to be really doing that. So yes, there's a couple of things that have been added, again, Pulse Audio, it's just screen reader can just work. Screen reader can work a lot easier. You couldn't do that with ALSA because ALSA doesn't work with Bluetooth, and I'm trying to find where they actually say that. Yeah, one of the benefits of switching to Pulse Audio is that now means screen reader audio can be played through Bluetooth devices. It might not seem like much to you, but to someone who relies on a screen reader and has a setup that they use on a day-to-day basis, these little changes to us are big changes, and it's a great, great thing. I'm very glad to see that. So, as I mentioned, there are a couple of other things that are in this OS release, some hardware changes, and in fact those hardware changes reflect something we didn't even have time to talk about this week, which is the new Raspberry Pi 4 case fan. Although, to be honest, there isn't all that much to say. It just seems to be a nicely well-designed fan that works with the official Raspberry Pi 4 case, and there is this product launch blog, and there is also a much more detailed blog describing how they kind of came up with it and all that kind of stuff. But yes, I suppose since I didn't manage to do a Things for Makers Christmas show this year because of unfortunate computer dying events, this might be a good one. I mean, this is a $5 fan that clips into the official case of the Raspberry Pi. If you know someone who's just got a Raspberry Pi 4 and doesn't have any of the bits yet, this is a very cheap, as they mentioned, stocking filler product. Fancy. Yeah, I get it, because it's a fan, you see. Fancy? It's a fan, you see. Oh, Ian, stop it. So that was our show for this week. I hope it wasn't too weird or different for you. It is sort of nice for me to know in a way that this show could work on the road if it ever needed to. And as I probably mentioned earlier in the show, I was actually hoping that this would be a little bit of a bigger show for this 25 episode special. We would have talked about some Christmas presents and all that kind of stuff. But instead, we will have to have a larger show in the new year to celebrate the new equipment and the fact that this show is growing every single week. But for now, thank you for sticking with me through these mild technical difficulties. I hope you do not have any of those in the coming week. Take care.